In this session, we discussed the dropped oil prices and the effect on the energy sector. The prices seem to stabilize nowadays, but there are still some very big impacts. We've discussed how governments should be responding but are not responding. Of course, we touched upon the BEPS discussion. Of course, BEPS is not only related to dropped oil prices, but also to the economic crisis, which gave it really a boost. And quite a lot of oil majors will have big difficulties in meeting the BEPS requirements if they are implemented. But it's still to be seen how these will be implemented, because all countries are starting to implement their own rules according to BEPS, but it's not a harmonization as yet. And a bit of good news, we also will touched upon the M&A possibilities there are due to the crisis, because there are quite a lot of companies with deep pockets. Very welcome with this energy breakout organized by the energy service line of Taxand.
Recent cycle of high energy prices really began in '99, just a year short of the new century. And that's when the price movements really started moving upwards and oil prices surged. While all of this price movement was happening, there was a growing concern around the world on greenhouse gases and climate change. Governments, specifically the large economies and consuming economies, were getting concerned with the environmental impact of fossil fuels. We've seen three trends emerging: carbon taxation during the phase of high energy prices, a cross-subsidy for the lower income households, and incentivization of renewable energy. So in the period between 2014 end and now, really tax policies haven't really responded. Governments haven't been able to bring in a new dimension on tax policies.
The first point is the area of sanctions, which projects are suffered from them. Actually, there are two types of the sanctions. The first level is they prohibit to supply to Russia certain type of the equipment and technology related not to all oil and gas projects, but to the Arctic, deep sea and shale projects. Basically, the sanctions that launched by the US, they relate to the oil and gas industry. EU sanctions, they are limited only to oil, so the gas is not suffered from EU sanctions. So the second group of sanctions is the limitation for crediting of the certain Russian energy companies from the list elaborated by the US or EU authorities. And basically in this list now there are the all states oil and gas companies, and there are all private Russian oil and gas companies. So those, they are not able to get financing from the US or EU institution for the long term, for the period of more than 90 days. So basically there are these two types of the sanctions that we face with now. I should also say that in Russian energy sector, in Russian oil and gas sector in particular, the amount of the foreign equipment using for extracting oil and gas is now about 60%. So only 40% of the equipment is produced locally. So therefore you can imagine if the level of the sanction will remain unchanged in next years. So the project which are developing now by the Russian oil and gas companies, they will really suffer due to the lack of necessary technology and equipment. The second development is the substitution of the import. Russian governments develop certain policy and the plan how to substitute the imports, in particular in the area of energy sector. So they are now financing the companies that produce necessary machinery equipment, and the plan is to get in 5 years, in 2020, to decrease these 60% of the foreign equipment in Russian energy sector to 40%. So, but whether this expectation will work and whether we will be able to achieve them, future will show.
we are seeing preemptive moves by a number of nations around the globe. So the UK, the US, and now Australia they're all early movers in implementing, or at least announcing their intention to implement BEPS-style measures.
The only way BEPS is going to work is if it's going to be harmonized. And I think the biggest worry for any tax practitioner is if you don't get harmonized rules, but just like BEPS rules implemented on a national level.
Yeah, I think Jimmy, that is the underlying theme here. And we heard, I think it was Mukesh yesterday he used the word confusion when talking about what we're going to see from nations around the world in terms of their BEPS implementation. I think there is a real risk here. It is real that we will have a lack of harmonisation. So, when the objective is to have countries aligned in how we're going to approach these BEPS measures, early movers like Australia, like the US, like the UK, I think actually really put that in jeopardy. When action item 13 is also viewed in the context of actions 8, 9 and 10 around ensuring that transfer pricing outcomes are in line with the value creation, which is really one of the overarching objectives that we started looking at this morning, it is going to pose a challenge for the oil and gas sector. Why? Because if we look at LNG, for example, the integrated supply chain that we have operating out of Australia, so we drill it in Australia, we have someone transport it out of Australia, we have our marketing hubs in jurisdictions like Singapore, we have the liquefaction taking place elsewhere. The country-by-country reporting, I think, when you look at how it's going to impact on the value chain and the amount of information that is going to be presented to each of the nations in which those particular steps in that value chain takes place, we are going to see, I think, real questions being asked about, well, where is the value being created in that value chain? And how does, I think one of the presenters yesterday was talking, do you get taxed in the source country? Do you also get taxed in the marketing country? Do you also get taxed in the liquefaction country? All of that information is going to be readily available to the various jurisdictions. So I think that there's going to be some really interesting conversations about where the taxing point really is.
But the drivers around fracking will include environmental issues, right? To what extent will the environmental issues come into play in the future and somehow curtail, perhaps, the activities? Will price maintain the level needed? Gokul mentioned the shale band, and it's 45 to 65 is about exactly right. Below 45, it's not economical to frack. Above 60, it's game on, right? And then demand, right? Global demand. The demand in the United States is, the economy has been recovering, but, the United States economy is not a manufacturing economy. It is very much a service economy. And so demand for oil and gas is it's not really wholly domestic, right? We really need, from a United States perspective, we really have to find ways to export, the oil and gas product. And so we need global demand, we need global recovery in order to really fuel, again, significant investment in fracking. Production tax credits, right? Those are the fun little credits that we like to give out for wind and solar projects. And they do help the finance. They're typically about a third of the cost of finance for these projects, maybe 35%. The problem with them is that they're not really usable. The utility companies don't need credits. They're sitting on large losses and large depreciation deductions anyway. And tax equity, which is, so the production tax credits can be structured in partnership form, and they can be, quote unquote, sold to investors. Those investors are typically your tax equity investors, and it's not a significant market. The market's not big for them. They took a break for a couple of years, and they really haven't come back yet. So it's not a gigantic amount of opportunity around developing wind and solar projects in the United States.